October 14th, 1938, Hudson Federal Savings and Trust. 125th Street. A bank president took a small green passbook out of Bumpy Johnson's hand. He did not open it politely. He held it up to the lobby light. Then he read the deposits out loud. $30, $30, $30. He laughed on the third one. The marble floor carried the sound to every corner. 40 customers heard it. A pregnant woman near the radiator looked at her shoes. "We don't build a bank out of nickels," he said. Then he let the passbook drop. It hit the marble and slid. It stopped against a brass spittoon. Nobody picked it up. 30 days later, that branch was finished. Not burned, not robbed, finished. Chains through the door handles, a notice pasted crooked on the glass, 9,000 depositors gone somewhere else. And the man who laughed was gone with them. Harlem told this story 100 different ways for 40 years. Some versions had guns in them. The true shape of it had almost none. Because Bumpy Johnson did not answer that laugh with a gun, he answered it with arithmetic. So what did he actually do in those 30 days? Why did a man who could have settled it in one night choose to take a month instead? And why, for the rest of his life, did he keep that ruined little passbook in his coat pocket like a bullet he never fired? To answer that, we have to go back. Back to the morning he walked into that bank. Before we continue, I'd like to ask you for one small favor. If you enjoy these stories about Bumpy Johnson, Harlem, and the people who shaped that era, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us keep these stories alive and bring you more of them. Now let's return to the story. Harlem smelled like rain that had not arrived yet. October in 1938 sat heavy on the avenues. The air off the Harlem River came in cold and left in cold. Awnings snapped. Newsboys shouted about Europe. On Lenox Avenue, the streetlights buzzed on early because the sky had quit at 4 o'clock. Bumpy Johnson walked south with his hands in his coat pockets. He was 33 years old. He wore a gray topcoat with a velvet collar. He wore no jewelry at all that day, which was itself a decision. 2 men walked behind him. Neither one carried anything he would have to explain. The first was Junie Wells. People called him Sandpaper because of his voice. He chewed cinnamon toothpicks and smelled faintly of them. The second was a former church choir director named Odell Marsh. Everybody called him Deacon. He carried a hymnal with numbers penciled in the margins. "You could send me," Junie said. "No," Bumpy said. "They know your face in there." That's the point. They stopped at the corner. Old men were playing checkers outside Bloomstein's window with their coats buttoned to the throat. Across the street, Hudson Federal Savings and Trust filled half a block with limestone and self-regard. It had 4 Corinthian columns it did not need. It had an eagle over the door. It had a clock that ran 2 minutes fast so that everyone inside would feel late. Deacon looked up at it. Man builds a temple, he expects worship. He expects deposits, Bumpy said. He crossed the street alone. Here is what mattered about that building, and it is the whole spine of this story. Hudson Federal's Harlem branch took in money from Harlem. It did not lend money to Harlem. Every Friday, laundry workers and porters and Pullman men and hairdressers pushed cash across that counter. Church treasuries kept their building funds there. Funeral homes kept their reserves there. The money went in. The money went downtown. Mortgages in Harlem were declined at that branch as a matter of house policy. Not shouted, not written on the wall, just declined. If a Harlem family wanted a house, the bank had a friend for that. A realty company 2 doors down called Pallister Realty and Contract Company. Pallister sold houses on installment contracts. No deed until the last payment. Miss one payment and you lost everything you had put in. The bank financed Pallister. Pallister took the houses back. The bank financed the next sale of the same house. The same brownstone could be sold 4 times in 9 years. Nobody in Harlem could prove that in October of 1938. But Bumpy Johnson had spent 11 months quietly collecting the pieces of it. He pushed through the brass revolving door and the temperature changed. The lobby was warm and dry and smelled of ink, floor wax, and cigar. A radiator clanked twice near the window like it was clearing its throat. 2 lines, both long. Above the leftmost teller cage hung a small enameled sign. It said, "Special Accounts." Everyone in that line was black. Everyone in the other 3 lines was not. There was no law that made that sign. There was a brass bell on the president's desk instead. Bumpy took his place in the special line behind a woman holding a folded dollar and a baby. He waited 20 minutes without complaint. He was carrying 2 things that morning. The first was the green passbook. It was a small thing, 4 inches by 6, bound in pebbled cloth the color of a pool table. Its corner was bent soft from a year in a coat pocket. Inside, in a teller's careful hand, were 16 deposits, all of them $30, all of them made on the last Friday of the month. The account was not in his name. It was in the name of the Bethel Star Burial Association, a small mutual aid society on 139th Street. $30 a month from 300 members paying a dime a week to bury their dead with dignity. The second thing he carried was an application, a $5,000 mortgage on a 4-story brownstone. The association wanted its own building. Bumpy Johnson was there as its treasurer. That title was real. He had signed for it in June. The teller looked at the application. Then she looked up, and she was young and her hands went still. "Sir, this has to go to Mr. Vance." "Then let's go to Mr. Vance." Harold Prentice Vance was 51 years old and built like a man who had been thin once and had made peace with the change. He wore a white carnation in his lapel every working day of his life. His secretary bought them by the dozen. He had run that branch for 9 years. He sat on 2 boards. He had a brother-in-law in the city buildings department and a standing table at a chop house on 34th Street. On his desk sat a brass bell the size of a teacup. When a black customer needed handling, Vance rang it. A guard named Riley would come and walk that customer to the special window. He had rung that bell perhaps 6,000 times without ever once thinking about it. He did not stand up when Bumpy came in. "Treasurer," he said, reading the application, "of a burial club. A burial association. That's a charming distinction." He set the paper down. He did not read the second page. "Where does the money come from?" "Dimes," Bumpy said. "Dimes. 300 members, 10 cents a week." Vance smiled the way a man smiles at a dog doing a trick. "Mr. Johnson, I know what business you're in. You know what they say I'm in. That's usually enough." Bumpy said nothing. He had learned long ago that silence made loud men keep going. Vance kept going. "You people bring me cash in paper bags, cash from policy slips, cash from God knows where, and then you want a mortgage like this is a savings club in Scarsdale. The dimes are legal. The dimes are pathetic." That word landed in the room and stayed there. Then Vance made his mistake. He picked up the passbook. He stood up with it. He walked around the desk and out through the office door, into the lobby, still talking. That was the thing about him. He needed an audience for his own good sense. "Let me show you what a Harlem account looks like," he said. 40 people were standing in those lines. He opened the little green book and he read, $30, $30, $30. He laughed on the third one. It was not a big laugh, it was worse, it was comfortable. 16 months, he said, $480, and you want 5,000 of mine. It isn't yours, Bumpy said. The lobby went quiet in a way lobbies do not usually go quiet. Time slowed. Vance's wrist opened. The passbook turned once in the air. The cover caught the light from the high windows. A teller's stamp thudded somewhere and then stopped. The little book hit the marble and skidded. It came to rest against a brass spittoon by the door. Nobody moved. The pregnant woman by the radiator looked at her shoes. Old Mr. Pinckney, a Pullman porter with 31 years on the New York Central, took his hat off. He did not know why. He just did. Bumpy Johnson walked across that marble floor. He bent down. He picked up the passbook. He brushed the grit off the cover with his thumb. Then he did the thing nobody in that lobby ever forgot. He turned to the room. Not to Vance. To the room. "Excuse the noise," he said. He put his hat back on his head. He walked out under the eagle and into the cold. Junie was waiting at the curb. He had seen it through the glass. "Say the word," Junie said. "No." "Boss, he touched a book," Bumpy said. "Not a person. He touched you." "He touched a book." Deacon caught up, breathing hard. 300 people are going to hear about this by supper." "Good," Bumpy said. They started walking north. The wind pushed grit along the sidewalk. At the corner, Bumpy stopped and looked back at the columns. "Deacon, sir, how many deposit accounts does that branch hold? I'd have to ask around." "Ask around." He took out the passbook. He turned it over in his hand twice. "And find out who owns Pallister Realty." That was the first minute of the 30 days. Nobody had counted it yet. Bumpy Johnson did not go home that afternoon. He went to a barber shop on 7th Avenue and sat in the third chair, and he did not let the man cut anything. He just sat with a hot towel over his face while the shop talked. He needed to hear how the story was already traveling. It took 90 minutes to come back to him with 3 lies attached. By the time the towel cooled, a shoeshine boy had heard that Bumpy Johnson had turned a bank president's desk over. He pulled the towel off and looked at the ceiling fan. "That's not what happened," he said. "Then what happened, mister?" "Nothing happened yet. Here is why the boy mattered, and he will matter again. His name was Cornelius. Everybody called him Little Bit, and he was 13, and he shined shoes on the corner of 125th and 7th with a box his uncle made him. He worked 40 feet from Hudson Federal's front door. He could count. He liked counting. That night, Bumpy Johnson went upstairs to a room above a laundry on 142nd Street. The room had a card table, a green-shaded lamp, a coal stove, and a woman named Ruby Alston who kept his books. Ruby wore gold-rimmed glasses. Her right thumb was permanently blue from a leaking fountain pen she refused to replace. She counted out loud when she was thinking low, like praying. "You're early," she said. "I need the ledgers." "Which ones?" "All of them." She looked at him over the glasses. "That's a long night. Put coffee on." The coffee was bitter and too hot, and he drank it anyway. The radiator hissed. A trumpet was practicing the same 4 bars in a window across the alley over and over, never getting the last note. They worked until 3 in the morning, and what Bumpy Johnson was looking for was not revenge. Not yet. He was looking for the size of the thing. By 2 o'clock he had it on a single sheet of paper in Ruby's small hand. The numbers business in Harlem in 1938 ran on cash. Cash needs somewhere to sit. Bumpy did not bank at Hudson Federal. He was not that trusting. But 11 churches did, 6 funeral homes did, 4 burial associations did, 2 building and loan clubs did. 19 small merchants he collected from or protected or simply knew did. Ruby set down the pen. "You understand what you're holding." "Say it anyway." "You're not a customer of that bank," she said. "You're their landlord and they don't know it." Bumpy looked at the paper for a long time. "No," he said. "Not yet. Not until they all move together. And if they don't? Then I'm a man with a wet coat and a bent book." He put the passbook on the table next to the sheet of paper. He tapped it once. 30 days, he said. Ruby frowned. Why 30? Because that's a month, he said, and a bank lives on months. Then he told her the second reason, and it was the true one. Because if it's fast, it's me, he said. If it's slow, it's them. He was in bed by 4 and awake by 7, and he was already 3 moves ahead of a man who did not know a game had started. There is a moment worth putting down here because it explains everything about the shape of what came next. The smell in that bank lobby had been ink. Not money, not marble, ink. And ink had a history with Ellsworth Johnson. He was 7 years old in Charleston, South Carolina. The store was Rowley's on the corner with a hanging scale and a cat that slept on the flour sacks. Black families in that neighborhood bought on credit. Credit meant the book. The book was a ledger Mr. Rowley kept under the counter. He wrote in it with a pencil he carried behind his ear, and he wrote what he wanted. Ellsworth's mother came in on a Saturday with $2.40. Margaret, Rowley said, you're at $4.10. That's not right, sir. It's in the book. Ellsworth watched his mother's hands. She had large hands from laundry work, and they were folded in front of her like a woman in church. She did not raise her voice. She did not ask to see the page. She counted out $2.40 and set it on the counter and said thank you. Outside, the boy was furious in the way only a small boy can be furious. Mama, he's lying. I know it. Then say it. She kept walking. The dust on that road was fine and hot, and it got into everything. Say what, baby? Say it to who? And then she stopped, and she crowed down in front of him, and she took a small pad out of her apron. It was a penny tablet with a soft cover, and its corner was bent. You see this? Yes, ma'am. This is mine. He can write whatever he wants in his book, but I write in mine. She showed him the columns, dates, amounts, every purchase for a year in her own careful hand. Then why did you pay him? Because today I couldn't prove it, she said. Numbers don't argue, Ellsworth. Numbers wait. He remembered the smell of that pencil lead. He remembered the bent corner. He made himself a promise on that road, and it was not the promise people usually expect from a boy who grows up into a name like his. He did not promise to get even. He promised that one day he would be the one holding the book. 1938 Harlem, 33 years old, a passbook in his coat pocket with a bent, soft corner. You may think you know why he waited 30 days. Keep listening. The next morning was day 2, and day 2 belonged to Little Bit. Bumpy Johnson met him at 7:15 with a paper sack of buttered rolls. You work that corner? Yes, sir, since I was 11. You see the bank? I see everything. Can you count? The boy looked insulted. I can count better than my teacher. Then here's a job. Bumpy crouched to the boy's level, which was a thing he did with children and almost never with men. Every day, 9 to 3, count how many people go in that door. That's a lot of counting. 2 columns, colored and white, 2 lines on a page, nothing else. How much? $1 a day. The boy's eyes went wide and then narrow because he was a Harlem child and he knew that $1 always meant something. Am I gonna get in trouble? No, Bumpy said. You're going to get famous. He gave him a pencil and a small pad with a soft cover. Little Bit counted for 29 straight days. He never missed one. That number matters later, so hold it. Day 4 brought the first real discovery, and it did not come from a ledger. It came from a woman standing in the rain outside a funeral home on 134th Street. Her name was Ophelia Reeves. She was 58. Her husband had been a plasterer. Deacon brought her upstairs to the room above the laundry because she had a paper bag and would not let anyone else touch it. She took off her wet hat. She sat down. She put the bag on the card table. They took my house, she said. When? March. Inside the bag were 9 years of receipts, 9 years of $31 payments to Pallister Realty and Contract Company on a house at 212 West 136th Street. She had paid $3,348. Her husband had died in January. She missed February. She missed March. In April, a man came with a paper and 2 policemen, and she was out on the sidewalk with a chifforobe and a canary. She had no deed. She had never had a deed. Under an installment contract, you own nothing until the final payment. They gave me nothing back, she said. Not a dollar. Ruby did the arithmetic without being asked. Her lips moved. 9 years, she said quietly. She paid more than the house cost. Bumpy had been standing at the window. He turned around. Mrs. Reeves. Sir, who did you make those payments to? Pallister. Mr. Deeds at the desk. And where did the money go? I don't know that. I do, he said. He picked up one of her receipts and held it to the lamp. At the bottom, in small gray type, was a line most people would never read. Depository, Hudson, Federal Savings and Trust, Harlem Branch. He set it down very carefully, the way a man sets down something that might go off. Ruby. I see it. How many Pallister houses are there? I'd have to walk the block records. Then walk them. She looked up. That's the Register of Deeds downtown. They don't love me down there. They'll love you Tuesday, Bumpy said. Wear the gray coat. Mrs. Reeves was crying by then, and not from the story, from being believed. Bumpy Johnson gave her $40 and did not make a speech about it. Then he did something that made Junie Wells furious for a week. He told her not to sue. Not yet, he said. If you sue in October, they settle you for $200 and a promise, and then you're the only one. So what do I do? You wait, he said. 26 more days. She looked at him hard. Mr. Johnson, I'm 58 years old. What's in 26 days? Company, he said. Ruby Alston spent 3 days downtown in the Register of Deeds, with a pencil and a stack of index cards. What she came back with on day 8 changed the whole operation. She laid the cards out on the card table in rows. Junie moved the lamp closer. The bulb hummed. 209 houses, she said, in Harlem, between 132nd and 145th, all conveyed through Pallister at some point since 1929. How many changed hands more than twice? Ruby moved a stack of cards forward with one blue thumb. 81, Deacon whistled low. And here's what I want you to hear, Ruby said. 30 of them changed hands 4 times. Bumpy looked up. 30. 30, she said. Same houses, 4 sets of families each, 4 sets of down payments, 4 sets of foreclosures. Nobody spoke for a moment. The trumpet across the alley started its 4 bars again. That's 120 families, Junie said, off 30 houses. That's a machine, Bumpy said. He walked to the window and looked down at the wet street. Cadillacs were idling in front of a club on the corner. Somebody was laughing. Ruby, who owns Pallister? That's the part you'll want to sit down for. I'll stand. Pallister Realty and Contract Company, incorporated 1929, 3 shareholders of record. She turned a card over. One is a lawyer in Yonkers, one is a widow in Rye, and the third, a holding company called Vanceroy Associates. The room got very quiet. Junie took the toothpick out of his mouth. He's selling the same houses to us over and over, he said, and banking it with himself. And declining our mortgages so we have no other door, Deacon said. Bumpy Johnson stood at that window a long time. Then he said something none of them expected. This is bigger than the bank. Meaning what? Meaning if I break the bank, I've had a good month, he said. If I break the bank and the paperwork, 120 families get a lawsuit. He turned around. We do both. Junie leaned back in his chair. Boss, I gotta say this once. Say it. One night, two men, a quiet conversation with Mr. Vance in his garage in Pelham. He shrugged. It's Tuesday and then it's over. Bumpy did not get angry. He almost never did, which frightened people more than anger. He came and sat down across from Junie and put both hands flat on the table. If we do that, what happens to Mrs. Reeves' house? Junie said nothing. Nothing happens to it, Bumpy said. The company keeps it. Some other man rings the bell and we're the animals they said we were. He tapped the table twice. They don't get to be the victims in this, not one day of it. He stood up. No guns, nobody's garage, nobody's family. He put on his hat. We're going to do it with a line of people and a piece of paper. That was day 8 of 30. He had 22 left and no idea yet how badly it was about to go. There was a woman he needed, and asking her cost him something. Madame Stephanie St. Clair had been the queen of Harlem policy when Bumpy Johnson was still learning the streets. Everybody called her Queenie. She had fought Dutch Schultz to a standstill and outlived him. She lived on Edgecombe Avenue on Sugar Hill with a view of the whole valley. Her parlor smelled of gardenias and strong coffee. A parakeet muttered in a cage. She served him in a china cup that was thinner than paper, and she watched him hold it. You want money? She said. No. Then you want names. I want your mailing list. Queenie set her cup down. She had a French accent that got sharper when she was interested. My list of what? Your subscribers, your betters, the women who read your letters in the Amsterdam news. And what would you do with my people? Give them a bank. He put the sheet of paper on her table. The list of every church, funeral home, association, and merchant with money at Hudson Federal. Then he put down a second sheet. Dunbar National Bank, 8th Avenue at 150th, a bank in Harlem with black tellers behind the windows and black clerks at the desks. She looked at both pages for a long minute. You want to move a neighborhood's money? She said. In a month. In 30 days. You are not a patient man. I'm the most patient man you know. She laughed once, sharp, then her face changed and she leaned toward him. Let me tell you what will happen, Ellsworth. He waited. You will win the fight, she said, and they will still not write your name in their book. That was the thing he could not say himself. She had said it in 9 words in a parlor with a parakeet, and it sat on his chest like a hand. He turned the coffee cup a quarter turn on its saucer. I know, he said. Then why? Because Mrs. Reeves has a canary and no house. Queenie looked at him a while longer. Something in her softened and she did not let it show for long. You'll need the paper, she said. I'll need the paper. And you cannot be in the paper, not your name, not once. I know that too. Do you? She sat back. You are about to do the largest thing of your life, and the price is that nobody may say you did it. That's the price. She rang a small bell for her girl to bring more coffee, and Bumpy Johnson flinched at the sound of a bell, and she noticed, and she never once mentioned it. Day 11. The Amsterdam news office, a borrowed desk, a reporter named Carlyle Boone with a cigarette he never lit. Deacon delivered the material. Not Bumpy, never Bumpy. 209 index cards, 9 years of Ophelia Reeves's receipts. A list of 30 houses sold 4 times each. And one more thing which Ruby had gotten from a clerk at the Home Owners Loan Corporation office for the price of a bottle of rye and a shared grandmother in Norfolk. A map. A residential security map of New York City drawn that very year by men who had never walked 138th Street. The city was colored in 4 grades: green, blue, yellow, red, Harlem was red, all of it, solid from Central Park to the Harlem River, and in a red so deliberate it looked wet. Boone spread it on the desk under a gooseneck lamp. He put his palm on it. "Sweet Lord," he said. "That's the reason," Deacon said. "Right there in ink. This is federal. This is the wall, and Pallister is the only door in it." Boone looked up. "Who's giving me this?" "Concerned citizens. Concerned citizens don't have a register of deeds clerk in their pocket." Deacon smiled and said nothing. Boone lit the cigarette at last. He smoked half of it, looking at the red. "I can run this in 3 weeks," he said. "I need affidavits, real ones, notarized, from families, not from a burial club." "How many?" 30 would be a bomb." Deacon stopped at the door. "Say that number again." 30, Boone said. 30 families on the record, and this bank is in Albany's lap. Deacon walked to the elevator, and he was laughing quietly, and the elevator man asked him what was funny. "Nothing," Deacon said. "The Lord just repeated himself." Getting 30 affidavits out of Harlem in 1938 was harder than robbing a bank, because families were afraid, and they were right to be. They had jobs downtown, and they had children in school. They had relatives who still owed Pallister money. Deacon and Ruby worked the churches for 6 nights. Bumpy never came. His face in a church basement would have turned a housing meeting into something else. Instead, he sent money for coffee, chairs, and a stenographer. By day 16, they had 19 affidavits. By day 18, they had 22. And on day 19, everything broke. Junie Wells came up the laundry stairs 2 at a time, and Junie never hurried. "They know." Bumpy did not look up from the ledger. "Sit down. Boss, sit down and say it slow." Junie sat. He took the toothpick out and held it in his fist. "Vance called a meeting yesterday. Bank counsel, 2 men from Pallister, somebody from the mortgage syndicate downtown." "How do you know?" "Odessa." Odessa Pike was one of 2 black employees inside that branch. She was not a teller. She cleaned the offices at 6 in the evening and emptied the wastebaskets, and she had been doing it for 11 years, and not one white man in that building had ever learned her last name. She had brought out a torn carbon sheet in her apron. Junie put it on the table. Ruby read it and went pale under the lamp. "They're calling loans," she said. "How many?" She looked up. 30. The room went cold, and the coal stove was going, and it was still cold. 30 commercial loans across Harlem. Demand notes, payable in full in 10 days. A pharmacy on 8th. 2 barber shops, a print shop, a dress shop on 125th. A funeral home. A restaurant that had fed people through 1932 on credit. Every one of them owned by somebody who had signed an affidavit, or whose brother had, or whose pastor had. Deacon sat down slowly on the arm of a chair. "He's not fighting the newspaper," he said. "He's fighting the witnesses." "He's showing the neighborhood the cost of my name," Bumpy said. And then it got worse, because it always does before it turns. At 8 that night, detectives from the 32nd Precinct hit 3 of Bumpy's spots at once. Not a real raid, a message raid. They broke a mirror on 8th Avenue. They took $1,100 in policy slips off a table on 139th. They put a controller named Willie Tate in a cell for the night on nothing at all. At 9:40, they picked up Bumpy Johnson himself outside the laundry. Vagrancy. A grown man with money in his pocket and standing on a public sidewalk in the neighborhood where he lived. They held him 31 hours. He sat in that cell and did not ask for a lawyer for the first 9 of them because he wanted to hear what the guards said when they thought he was asleep. What he heard was a name. Marchetti. Silvio Marchetti brokered money between downtown families and uptown operations. Cash needed papers. Papers needed a friendly bank. Hudson Federal had been that friend for years, which meant Vance had made a phone call. which meant Bumpy's own world now had a reason to want him quiet. On the second morning, a lawyer got him out. He walked into daylight on 135th Street unshaven, in a suit that had slept on concrete. Junie was at the curb with the car. "We're going home." "No, Deacons. Boss, you need a bath in 8 hours. I need a room and 11 people." That was day 21. 9 days left, and everything he had built was coming apart in his hands. The room was a church basement on 137th Street with a low ceiling and pipes that dripped. 11 people came, all the business owners whose loans had been called. They had been told a man wanted to talk to them. They had not been told which man. When Bumpy Johnson came down those stairs, 3 of them stood up. One of them, a pharmacist named Curtis Odom, put on his hat to leave. "Mr. Odom." Odom stopped on the stairs. "You have every right to walk out," Bumpy said. "I'd like 9 minutes first. I've got a wife and a store." "You've got a store for 10 days. Then you've got a wife." Odom came back down and stood by the wall. He did not sit. The room smelled of coffee and wet plaster. A radiator dripped into a coffee can. Somebody's child was upstairs running back and forth. Bumpy did not stand at the front. He pulled out a folding chair and sat in the middle of them. "I'm the reason those notes came," he said. Nobody argued. "Vance can't call in 120 families, so he called in you, because you're the ones with something to lose this month." A dressmaker named Mrs. Fontaine spoke up. Her voice shook and she said it anyway. "Sir, I have $800 owing. I have 309 in the world." "I know." "Then what good is a newspaper article to me?" "None," he said. That surprised them into silence. "Here's what I've got. It isn't pretty." He laid it out in short pieces. Every called loan would be paid, not by them. Paid in full, in cash, on the 9th day, not by Bumpy Johnson's money alone. It could not be. That would be one man buying a neighborhood, and he knew what people would say about where that money came from. So instead, a pool. $14,200 put up by Queenie St. Clair, 11 churches, 4 burial associations, 2 building and loan clubs, 6 funeral homes, and yes, quietly, by Bumpy Johnson. Deposited at Dunbar National Bank in the name of a new thing they would call the Harlem Mutual Credit Committee. Every one of those 30 notes paid at the teller window in front of witnesses on the same afternoon. "Why the same afternoon?" Odom asked. Bumpy looked at him. "Because a bank that calls 30 loans expects to take 30 stores," he said. "If it gets 30 checks instead, it has cash it didn't want and no stores." He let that sit. "And because 30 people walking into that lobby at once is not a payment," he said. "It's a photograph." Mrs. Fontaine put her hand over her mouth. Odom took his hat off. "And the paper?" "Runs the same week," Bumpy said. "Not before." There it was, the whole engine out loud in a basement under a dripping pipe. The loans paid so Vance had no hostages. The affidavits filed so he had no cover. The newspaper timed so the city could not look away. And then the depositors. "You're going to empty him," Odom said slowly. "No," Bumpy said. "Harlem's going to empty him, and I'm just going to be standing on the corner when it happens." 28 people signed the committee papers that night. 2 did not, and he never held it against either of them. On the way out, Odom shook his hand at the bottom of the stairs. "Why do you care about a widow's brownstone, Mr. Johnson? Straight answer." Bumpy pulled the little green passbook out of his coat. He held it up. The corner was soft. The cover had a gray scuff from the marble floor. "Because a man can write anything he wants in his book," he said. "Nobody ever checked mine." He put it back in his pocket. "This month we check theirs." There was one more conversation that week, and it was the hardest one, and it happened in a kitchen. Not a mansion. A kitchen on 142nd with a table, an icebox, and a window that looked at another window. The woman across the table was his sister's oldest friend, Vestal Meade. She had known him since Charleston. She was the only person alive who called him Ellsworth without an argument. She poured coffee she did not drink. "Sit down," she said. "You're going to fall down." "I'm fine. You've slept 9 hours in 4 days. Your hands are shaking." He looked at his hands. They were. She said nothing for a while. The radiator clanked. Outside, someone was calling a child in for the night. "You know what scares me," she said. "Tell me." "It isn't the police." "No. You've been arrested before and it never touched you." She turned her cup slowly. "What scares me is what happens if you win." He waited. "Right now you're a man they whisper about," she said. "After this you'll be the man Harlem calls when the roof leaks, when the landlord won't fix the heat, when somebody's boy gets picked up." "That's not the worst thing." "It's not," she agreed, "but you can't ever be tired again." He looked out at the other window. A lamp went off behind a shade. "Ellsworth," she said, "who takes care of you?" He didn't answer. She reached over and buttoned the top button of his coat, the way you do for a child going out into weather. She held onto the button a second longer than she needed to. "Go on," she said. "Do your arithmetic." He went down the stairs and stood on the stoop, and the iron railing was cold under his hand, and he stood there a long time before he moved. Day 23 came in with rain. Ruby had the affidavits at 26. Boone wanted 30. The last 4 were the hardest because the last 4 always are. 3 came in on day 24 from a single building on 135th, where 3 brothers had each been sold the same top-floor apartment in different years. The 30th would not come at all. Her name was Alma Gadsden, and she had lost a house on 141st in 1934, and she was the only person who had ever gotten a written letter from Pallister with a specific instruction in it. The letter said her mortgage application had been forwarded to Hudson Federal and declined, and it named the reason. Neighborhood grade. That letter was the hinge. It connected the red map to a name and an address and a family. She would not sign. Deacon went twice, Ruby went once. She would not open the door the 3rd time. On day 25, Bumpy Johnson went himself, and he went alone, and he did not bring money. She opened on the chain. "I know who you are." "Yes, ma'am. My son works for the post office." "I understand." "Do you? If my name is in that paper, some man downtown decides my son is trouble." "That's true," Bumpy said. "It could happen." She blinked. She had expected to be argued with. "Then why are you standing on my landing?" "Because I don't have anybody else with that letter." He did not push. He did not offer her $1. He stood in the hallway with his hat in his hand and the smell of somebody's greens cooking 2 doors down. "Mrs. Gadsden, may I say one thing and then leave?" "Say it." 29 people signed, he said. "Every one of them has something to lose. Every one of them signed anyway." He turned to go. "You'd be the 30th. He was 3 steps down when she spoke. "Mr. Johnson," he stopped. "If it goes wrong," she said, "you'll hear my name your whole life." "Yes, ma'am," he said. "That's the deal." She signed on the morning of day 26, at a notary's desk on 7th Avenue, with her son standing behind her chair. The stamp came down with a thud that everybody in that little office heard. 30 affidavits. Ruby put them in a leather case and did not let go of the handle for 9 blocks. Day 27, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. 30 people walked into the lobby of Hudson Federal Savings and Trust. They came in from both directions on 125th Street, and they came in dressed the way Harlem dressed for church, because they knew exactly what they were doing. Curtis Odom, the pharmacist. Mrs. Fontaine, the dressmaker. Two barbers, a printer with ink under his nails, a restaurant man with his wife on his arm. They filled that marble room wall to wall. Vance came out of his office because his guard Riley came and got him. He stood at the rail with his carnation and he watched them line up. And then, one at a time, they paid. $800, $420, $1,200, $650. Cashier's checks from Dunbar National Bank, every one of them in a neat sequence of numbers. Each teller had to stamp a note paid in full and hand back the paper. 30 times that stamp came down. Thud, thud, thud. Riley counted it under his breath without meaning to. Vance's face did not move for the first 11. On the 12th, a small muscle went in his jaw. Because a bank president knows what he is looking at. He had called those notes to take 30 storefronts on 125th Street and 8th Avenue at foreclosure prices. Instead, he was holding $14,000 of somebody else's cash, 30 canceled loans, and a lobby full of people who now owed him absolutely nothing. He had spent his only weapon. Mrs. Fontaine was the last in line. She was 61 years old and 4 feet 11 inches tall, and her hands shook so badly she had to set the check on the counter to slide it forward. The teller stamped it. She picked up her paper. She folded it twice. She put it in her purse and closed the clasp. Then she turned around and looked up at Harold Vance at the rail. "Thank you for your business," she said. Somebody near the door laughed and turned it into a cough. Vance went back into his office and did not come out for 2 hours. Bumpy Johnson was not in that lobby. He was across the street 40 feet away, sitting on a wooden chair while a 13-year-old boy shined his shoes. "Mr. Johnson, that's 31 colored gone in the door since 1 o'clock. Little Bit turned his pad around. "I never had a day like this." "Write the time next to it." The boy wrote the time. The rag snapped twice. Traffic went by. A trolley bell rang up the block. "Mr. Johnson, what happens tomorrow?" Bumpy looked at the columns on that little soft cornered pad. 27 days of them in a child's handwriting. "Tomorrow," he said, "somebody's going to read a newspaper." Thursday morning, day 28. The Amsterdam News hit the streets at 6. It was 3 pages. The map ran across 2 columns in gray tones, and the caption did not have to say much. The headline was 6 words: "The houses they sold 4 times." Boone had done the work. 30 affidavits quoted plainly. 209 addresses. 81 repeat conveyances. 30 houses sold 4 times over 9 years. Ophelia Reeves and her $3,348. Alma Gadsden's letter reproduced in full with the words "neighborhood grade" set in italic type. And in paragraph 9, the sentence that ended a career. Pallister Realty and Contract Company's majority shareholder of record was Vanceroy Associates, and the president of Hudson Federal's Harlem branch had signed the incorporation papers in his own hand in 1929. Bumpy Johnson's name was not in that article. Not once. Not in any of the follow-ups. He had made sure of it in advance, and it cost him something to do it, and he never complained about it afterward. By 8 in the morning, the paper was on every counter in Harlem. By 9, there was a line outside Hudson Federal. Not a mob. A line. Deacon Marsh had spent 11 days on this exact thing, and it was the quietest work of the whole operation. 11 churches, 4 burial associations, 2 building and loan clubs, 6 funeral homes. Every treasurer, every trustee, every deacon board. They had all voted the same resolution, and the resolution said one thing. On Thursday morning, withdraw. Not a protest, not a picket, not a single sign. Nobody breaking a window and handing the newspapers a different story, just depositors, exercising a right printed on the back of every passbook in America. The Bethel Star Burial Association was first through the door at 9:04. Their treasurer presented a small green passbook with a bent corner and a gray scuff on the cover. He asked to close the account. $480. The teller was the same young woman from the first day. Her hands went still again. Then she got up and went for Mr. Vance. Vance came out and looked at the man in the gray top coat with the velvet collar, and then he looked past him at the line coming through the revolving door. Mr. Johnson, Mr. Vance, you think this is something? I think it's $480. It's $480. That's what I said. The teller counted it out. The stamp came down. Closed. Bumpy Johnson picked up the passbook. He put it in his coat pocket. Then he stepped aside out of the way and he stood by the radiator for 1 full minute and watched what came in behind him. The Abyssinian Sunday School Fund, $912. Mount Olivet's Building Committee, $2,400. Randolph and Sons Funeral Home, $1,630. The Ladies' Progressive Sick and Death Benefit Club, $341 in a cracked leather purse, escorted by 4 women in their good hats. The line went out the door and down the block past the checkerboard at Blumstein's. Old men stopped playing to watch it go by. By 11 o'clock, the branch had paid out more cash than it normally paid in 3 weeks. By 1 o'clock, Riley the guard was propping the outer door open because the revolving door could not move people fast enough. At 2:10, a runner came from the main office downtown. At 2:40, the branch closed its windows 2 hours early and posted a notice that it would reopen Friday. The notice was hand-lettered. The ink ran. Friday, day 29, the line started at 7:15 in the morning in the rain. Little Bit counted 396 people before noon, and then he stopped counting because he said his pencil broke and his hand hurt, and both things were true. That afternoon, 2 men in gray suits arrived from the state banking department with a leather portfolio each. They were not there about the run. Runs happen. They were there because a newspaper had published with documents that a branch president had used bank credit to finance a realty company he controlled, which sold houses on contract to families his own branch had refused to lend to. That is not a scandal. That is a self-dealing violation, and it is written in the banking law in language even a friendly examiner cannot walk around. The examiners asked for the Pallister file at 3 o'clock. At 3:20, Odessa Pike, who cleaned that office at 6 every evening and whose last name nobody had learned in 11 years, was asked to bring up a box from the basement. She brought up the right box. She had made sure 11 days earlier that the right box was where she could find it. Nobody ever put that in a newspaper either. Day 30, Saturday, November 13th, 1938. It was cold and bright, and the wind came off the Harlem River and pushed paper down the gutters. The bank did not open. At 8 in the morning, there was a chain through the door handles and a padlock the size of a fist. The notice on the glass said temporary suspension of business at this location. It said depositor accounts would be transferred and honored. It said the words, pending examination. Time slowed. The chain hung against the brass push bar and moved a little in the wind. It touched the metal. It made a small sound once, and then again. The eagle over the door held its blank stone stare at the street. A newspaper page went along the sidewalk and stopped against the bottom step. Behind the glass, on a desk nobody was sitting at, a brass bell caught the morning light. Nobody rang it. Nobody was left to answer it. A crowd stood on the far sidewalk with their coats buttoned, not celebrating, just looking, the way people look at weather that is finally broken. Bumpy Johnson stood at the corner with his hands in his pockets. Junie was next to him, chewing a cinnamon toothpick. Deacon had his hymnal under his arm. Ruby had her leather case and her blue thumb. 30 days, Ruby said. 30 days, he said. You want to say something? He thought about it. No. Here is what actually happened, and it can be said in one sentence. Hudson Federal Savings and Trust never opened another day of business on 125th Street. The rest is detail, and the detail is the good part. The branch's deposits were transferred and its Harlem operations wound up before Christmas. The building was sold in 1939 and became a furniture showroom with a bad awning. Pallister Realty and Contract Company had its files subpoenaed in the spring. It stopped writing new contracts in February and it was dissolved within 2 years. The state banking department cited the branch for self-dealing and improper affiliation. The bank's board did what boards do. They discovered with great sorrow that they had known nothing. Harold Prentice Vance resigned on a Tuesday by letter. He never held an officer's post at a chartered bank again. He sold the house in Pelham the following autumn and moved to his wife's family's town in Connecticut. He had run that branch for 9 years and rung that bell perhaps 6,000 times. He was 51 years old and he had thrown a $480 passbook on a marble floor to make 40 strangers laugh. 40 strangers had not laughed. Ophelia Reeves did not get her house back. That is the truth, and it belongs in the story. But in 1940, 22 of the 30 families who signed those affidavits joined a civil action against the successor company. It settled quietly in 1942. She received $1,100. She bought a 2-family house on 144th Street with a deed in her own name and a canary in the front window. Alma Gadsden's son kept his job at the post office for another 29 years. Curtis Odom kept his pharmacy until 1961. And Dunbar National Bank, where the money went, took in more than 60 new Harlem accounts in 1 week and gained a reputation it kept for a generation. Little Bit was paid $29, one for every day he counted, in an envelope with his name spelled correctly. He was told to put it in the bank. He did. He grew up and became an accountant in Queens, and until the day he died he kept a small, soft-cornered pad with 2 columns of numbers in a drawer, and he showed it to his grandchildren, and they never believed him. There is one more scene, and then we can let it go. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday night, Bumpy Johnson was eating fried whiting at a table in Small's Paradise. The room was warm and loud. The band was working. Somebody was laughing too hard near the bar. The smell of hot grease and cigar smoke sat over everything like a blanket. A man came to his table and stood there until he looked up. It was Silvio Marchetti, who brokered money between downtown and uptown and who had made a phone call in October that put Bumpy in a cell for 31 hours. Marchetti had a lot to say. Men like him always did. He talked about respect. He talked about how nobody had understood what was happening. He talked about how the thing with the police had been a misunderstanding involving a third party, and he named the third party, and the third party was conveniently dead. He talked for a long time. Bumpy Johnson set down his fork. "Are you finished? I'm saying there's no problem here." "There isn't." Marchetti smiled and started to sit down. "Don't sit," Bumpy said. The smile stayed on his face and stopped being a smile. "I don't want anything from you," Bumpy said. "That's the whole conversation. You made a lot of noise for $400. I didn't make any noise at all." He picked the fork back up. "That's what you should think about." Marchetti left. He was never a problem again, and he never quite knew why he had decided that. Because the men downtown had watched November very carefully. They had watched a bank die on 125th Street without a single shot, without a single fire, without a single body, and without one name in one newspaper. That frightened them more than any garage in Pelham ever could have. A man who shoots you has to be somewhere. A man who moves 9,000 accounts is nowhere at all. So, the passbook. He kept it. Bumpy Johnson carried that little green book in the inside left pocket of his coat for the rest of his life. It weighed almost nothing. 2 ounces of cloth and paper. The cover was pebbled like a pool table and worn smooth in one spot where his thumb went. The corner was soft as cloth. The gray scuff from that marble floor never came out. Inside, 16 deposits of $30 in a young teller's careful hand. And on the last line in purple ink stamped a little crooked one word. Closed. People who knew him in the 1950s and 60s saw him take it out sometimes. In a car, at a table, on a stoop on Lenox Avenue with the streetlights buzzing to life above him. He never explained it. Once a young man in a diner asked him what it was, and he said only this. A receipt. For what? For a laugh. He put it back in his pocket and he never said another word about it, and the young man told that story for 50 years. Here is the lesson, and it costs nothing to take with you. Harold Vance thought power was the bell on his desk. He was wrong. The bell only worked while people came when it rang. Power was never the marble. It was never the columns or the eagle or the clock that ran 2 minutes fast. Power was 9,000 ordinary people who could decide on one cold Thursday morning to stand in a line. Bumpy Johnson understood something that November that most powerful men never learn. The strongest thing you can do to a man who humiliates you in public is to be patient in private. He did not raise his voice. He did not raise a hand. He raised the money. And he waited 30 days. Because a bank lives on months and because anything faster would have been about him. He always said the arithmetic did the work. Maybe it did. But somebody had to keep the book. An old woman in Charleston crouched in a hot road once and showed a 7-year-old boy a penny tablet with a bent corner. Numbers don't argue, she told him. Numbers wait. 30 years later, on a bright cold Saturday in November, a chain hung through a brass door handle on 125th Street and knocked against the metal in the wind. Behind the glass, a brass bell sat on an empty desk in the light. Nobody rang it. Because the man who used to ring it had learned the only lesson that ever really lands. You can write whatever you want in your own book. Just don't ever laugh out loud while somebody else is keeping theirs.